Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSPEAKS, we're talking about the hottest sector in technology today, which is generative AI. In the many years I've covered technology, I've never seen a more massive surge in interest than we've seen about generative AI in the last few months. Really stunning stuff. To talk about that, I'm joined by a very special guest. With me is Bratin Saha, Vice President of AI and Machine Learning at Amazon. Bratin, very good to have you with us today.
Thank you, James. Nice to be here.
So I want to ask you about certainly the AI sector. Would you agree it's been really obviously an enormous surge of interest in generative AI in the last few months? Stunning, is it not?
Yeah, and it's a really transformational technology, and you can imagine it's going to really lead to new user experiences, new conversational user experiences, more natural interfaces. And we think it's going to help us and others reimagine how products are built.
What is your sense? I mean, there's a number of trends, I think, driving the sector, but if you point to a trend or perhaps a couple trends, obviously the technology itself is very powerful, but what is driving the generative AI sector now as you see? What sort of forces are shaping it?
So I think the first one is really the amount of compute and data that helps you train bigger and bigger models. To give you some stats, 3 years back, 2019, the state-of-the-art models used to have maybe 300 million parameters. You can think of parameters as knobs that you can use to tune these models and train them.
Right.
Today, you can have up to 500 billion parameters or more. Okay, and that's a 1600x increase in just 3 years. That's like, super exponential. And what that has allowed us to do is take these really large models and train them on a lot of data. And what has allowed that to happen is for these models to have these very interesting capabilities in terms of generating text, generating images, and so on and so forth. And so as a result of that, you're seeing a lot of these really innovative use cases, which is, summarize a doc for me, or, create an email for me, or write a draft of this document for me that I can edit, or, create these small videos or images that I can subsequently edit, so on. And so, a lot of what we are going to see is generative AI being used as an assistant in many creative tasks, in many generative tasks. And I think that is what this confluence of a lot of compute, a lot of storage enabled primarily by the cloud, because, you really need the cloud to be able to have access to this kind of data, this kind of storage with the
volume of data, right,
governance and so on. So the cloud enabled a lot of developers to be able to deploy this kind of compute and this kind of data to train these large models. That has led to them having these generative capabilities, and that is leading to a lot of interesting use cases.
Well, all right, so I think there's many companies out there right now thinking to themselves, well, we need to get on board with this. We need to leverage this for our own competitive advantage. Any advice you would give to them? How should companies deal with this now, prepare for this now, given the enormous power that this technology has?
So I think it's really important that every company think about how they can reimagine their products, reimagine their customer experience by leveraging generative AI. And, the question you ask is, okay, if I have a product or a service, if this product or service were designed after generative AI was created, how would it look like? Right. And I think the place to get started would be starting with, you can take a model and these foundation models and try to train it yourself and so on, but that's going to be very expensive and pretty hard. And that is where I think all of the products that we announced yesterday are so relevant. So we announced Amazon Bedrock, and Amazon Bedrock gives customers a choice of foundation models that are pre-trained. And the important thing, the differentiated offering with Amazon Bedrock is the choice and the flexibility. So you get models from AI21, you get models from Anthropic, you get them from Stability.ai, and you get them Amazon's own first-party models called Titan. And so you're getting this choice and this flexibility because we really think that you are not going to have a single model that rules them all. And this thing that we're giving customers choice, I think is really key and really important for customers. And they're getting all of this choice and all of these pre-trained models with all of the security and privacy guarantees that Amazon provides. And it comes integrated with AWS services and the familiar environment. So we are basically taking care of all of that heavy lifting in terms of taking the data, curating the data, filtering out inappropriate content, training the model. And these model training can take weeks, months on thousands of GPUs. Okay. So all of that work we are doing, and I think customers can now start using these models. They can also fine tune it with their own proprietary data. And build generative applications on top of this. So I would highly encourage customers, companies of all kinds to start looking at Amazon Bedrock, figure out how they can leverage its choice and its flexibility, integrated with all of the security and services that AWS provides, and start reimagining how they're going to run their businesses.
Well, you mentioned the three companies that are on AWS that enterprises can choose from, and then of course there's Titan itself, Amazon's own model. Is there a way for companies to choose between those 3 or 4 different offerings? Is something that distinguishes? I mean, how would they go about researching that or even investigating that?
I think ultimately it'll depend down on the use cases. So for example, if you're looking more at kind of imaging visions kind of use cases, then you would probably go with stability.ai. Amazon Titan, we have a text model, but we also have an embedding model. These embedding models can be used in search kind of use cases. So at the end, we are effectively giving customers the choice and the flexibility through Bedrock. And, they can then use the model that works best for them. And we also have more models. We also have a lot more models on the, in SageMaker that customers can try out. But the advantage of using Bedrock is that you get a completely managed experience. You get the choice, the flexibility, the integration with AWS services, the security, and the privacy.
Well, I guess when a company thinks about using one of those services, they might say to themselves, "That's great. We might need an in-house AI expert or even an in-house AI team." To what extent is there some hand-holding going on if I go to Bedrock and say I want to use one of these services? Do I need a team of AI experts in-house to be dealing with that?
The Bedrock models, what we have done is we've done the pre-training. So, we have done all of the work of building the model and training it and making it ready to be used. In many situations, you can just use the model out of the box, what is called zero shot. Okay, so you can just go in and type prompts and ask it to do stuff and it'll generate output. And in those cases, you need no ML expertise, you need even no software or development expertise, and it's built that way. Now, there might be situations where you say, I have some proprietary data, or I have some custom data, and I want to tune the model to my own particular needs. In those cases, if you have to do some model training, it's still pretty easy. You still point a model to your data in S3 and it trains. But in those cases, you may or you will probably need some software or machine learning expertise when you're trying to train it. But for many use cases, you don't need to do any of that. You just come in, type a prompt, and you get a response back.
I think one of the big trends sweeping the tech industry is the idea of the democratization of technology, where it's not just the upper level executives, but there's all sorts of staffers who have access to the technology. It sounds somewhat like this is going into that. Like you wouldn't necessarily need a team of experts to access artificial intelligence, which to me feels like sort of a turning point in the history of AI.
Absolutely. And, these launches that we made yesterday, I think are really key in democratizing machine learning, generative AI. We have done the same with our machine learning and AI services. We have more than 100,000 customers. That is what made machine learning and AI pervasive. And I think these launches do that. So Amazon Bedrock democratizes access to these generative AI models, the use and access to these generative AI models. But we also announced infrastructure innovation. So we announced the Inferentia 2 processors and the Trainium 1N processors. And these significantly reduce the cost of training or serving on these models. They provide up to a 40% better price performance than any other EC2 instances. And now when you look at these generative AI models, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of it takes a lot of processors to be able to train them. And so it can be very expensive. And so being able to use Inferentia or Inf2 or Trainium 1N actually can reduce your cost by almost 2x. And that's a huge deal if I have to democratize access to these models. And then finally, we also launched Amazon Code Whisperer in GA, and it's available for free for every developer. Okay. And so now what we have done is we have said, look, we are going to be innovating on all of these vectors. There's the Bedrock models, with all its choice and security and flexibility and integration with AWS. There's the infrastructure innovations that significantly reduce the cost and make this a lot more accessible. And then there is Code Whisperer, which is a great application of generative AI for software development. It generates code for you, and it's available for free to every developer. So that's huge in terms of making generative AI in general accessible to all our customers.
Well, I think that I think this indeed is a turning point in the history of AI. It's in the last few months, ever since OpenAI, debuted ChatGPT. Let's talk about the future of generative AI. I mean, how do you see it developing over the next 12 months or so, in your view?
I think you are going to see these generative AI models increasingly get integrated into all kinds of applications. Some of it will be in the form of assistance for creative tasks, like, hey, generate a draft of this for me, or here is a document, generate a summary of this for me, or, I have some information coming in, generate a draft of an email for me, all kinds of that. Or, if I'm, let's say, an analyst, a marketing analyst, okay, generate maybe some ad copy for me, or generate some small videos for me. And then you go in and iterate on it and keep refining it and so on. And so I think what you're going to really see, or, change the way we interact with information, like change the way we search for information, change the way we look at documentation. Like, you won't have to browse documentation. You just ask a question and out comes the answer. So I think, you're going to see this increasingly get integrated into all kinds of applications, and just rethinking how customers and users get their information and how they act on that information. Because you are also going to see these, once you have the information, you can imagine that these apps will then be able to act on your behalf to get stuff done.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think part of the excitement or part of the interest around generative AI is that there's so much potential, but then mixed in, there's a little bit of there's a little concern, like, oh gosh, we don't know exactly what effect it's going to have. I don't know what the percentage is, 80% optimism, 20% worry, or maybe 60-40. I don't know I wouldn't guess on that. But what would you say to those people who say, oh, generative AI, I'm worried about it in terms of jobs or some other aspect? What would you say to the worriers out there?
I think we have made a lot of effort to make responsible AI, responsible use of these Bedrock and Code Whisperer possible. Like, we've put in a lot of effort. We already have a very robust way of doing responsible AI, because we have been doing AI and ML services for a long time. But we took it up a notch with Bedrock and with Code Whisperer. And so we actually went and curated the content, filtered the content for inappropriate use cases. We have an output filter on the Bedrock models, on the Titan model, that actually looks at the output and filters out inappropriate content. When you look at Code Whisperer, what we have is a reference tracker. So when it's generating code that may look similar to some other code that it has been trained on, it'll actually output the right copyright notice for you. So that makes it possible for you to use it. We have security checks in the code being generated. So we check it for security best practices, for the bugs that you have in the OWASP test suite. So, we have put in a lot of effort to make sure that these tools, these models, these AI services can be used in a responsible way.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's a lot of good stuff. Anything you'd like to add in closing about generative AI and or the Amazon offering?
I think these are exciting times. I think there's just a lot of innovation happening, and I expect that pace of innovation to keep accelerating. And so I think it's really important that customers and companies start thinking of what is the generative AI strategy and how they're going to embed generative AI in all facets of how they run their companies. And I think Amazon Bedrock, Amazon Code Whisperer from the perspective of software development, Inferentia to Trainium One are really key capabilities, and customers should really check those out.
Mm-hmm. Right, I think you said it. It's going to be a fascinating sector to watch in the months and years ahead. Thanks so much for sharing your insight, and please do come back and talk with us again sometime.
Happy to, James. Thanks for having me.